Goldman Sachs is in the crosshairs. Executives from that firm down in Washington, D.C. testifying before a Senate committee. The investigation continues, news stories every day. But still, there's so many questions, Lee Gallagher, about this investigation and, in fact, about behavior on Wall Street. And we've been hashing some of these out between ourselves, right?
Absolutely, Andy. One of the biggest questions is, how did this all begin? We heard about it a month ago, but obviously Goldman heard about it before then. And really, how did it start?
Right. That's a great question. Why was Goldman Sachs singled out? How did this investigation begin? Who tipped off the government? Who steered the government to Goldman Sachs and to this particular abacus deal? Apparently, Goldman Sachs first heard about the investigation all the way back in 2008. Typically, there's contact between the investigators and a target firm. But in this case, Goldman Sachs says it heard about it in 2008, then basically nothing, then boom, April 2010, they're hit with this civil action. So that's a big question. Another question that I have, Lee, is, why Goldman Sachs, were other firms doing these kinds of deals?
Sure. I mean, it's highly likely. And why Goldman Sachs? I mean, obviously, as the world knows, they have a big target on their head because of what they stand for and because they are the biggest, the fattest cat, if you will. But it's almost guaranteed that other banks were doing this. We know already, for example, that there was a trade in Chicago that's been uncovered recently, the Magnetar trade, which is a hedge fund in Chicago that's accused of doing many of the same things. But, on Wall Street, as goes one bank, so do they all. I mean, once there's a way to make money, it's highly likely that other banks are doing the same thing. So we'll see if we see other investigations. That's still unknown.
Right. And, I mean, another big question, Lee, is this behavior that Goldman Sachs engaged in illegal? Is it unethical? Is it unsavory? It's very complicated stuff, and you saw the Goldman Sachs executives wrestling with this and the senators trying to wrap their brain around it. I mean, in other words, sometimes Goldman Sachs is dealing with customers. Sometimes they're dealing with counterparties. Often, they're shorting securities they're selling. They say that that's okay. They say that that's typical. They say that it's okay for customers or counterparties to be on the other side of a trade, and that customers wouldn't even want to know if this was the case. That left a lot of senators and a lot of Americans scratching their heads. But, as far as the law goes, as far as ethics goes, it's very unclear whether this is above board or not. And in fact, you notice there's not a criminal investigation here, it's a civil investigation.
Absolutely, and Goldman Sachs does not believe it did anything wrong. I mean, that very clearly came out yesterday in Lloyd Blankfein's testimony.
Let me ask you this then, Lee. What do you think we're going to get out of this investigation at the end of the day?
Well, it's unclear. I mean, lots of stuff can happen. Obviously, this is coming at a time when financial regulation is, in the crosshairs. It's happening. It's being hotly debated. We haven't seen anything yet. And what will really be interesting is if and when financial regulation does finally come down the pike and we have something, tangible, whether or not it reflects anything of the Goldman investigation at all, whether this investigation and this inquiry is reflected in the changes that come if and when we ever do see them.